Ken Jennings and I, Brian Davidson, were almost inseparable when we were kids. We lived not far from each other, and my dad and his mom were brother and sister. They were each other's favorite brother and sister. My aunt and uncle were friendly and fun, so our families got together often. Although all 6 cousins were close, 3 for each family, the closest were Ken and me. As is almost always the case, Ken and I eventually drifted apart, mostly due to geography, as Ken's family moved 3,000 kilometers away when we were both 11. We were both single for a year. Eventually, we got used to it and still socialized whenever we could. We got together for 3 family reunions before we both headed off to college. While attending college on opposite coasts, we kind of lost touch. Since Ken was still single and had plenty of vacation time saved up, despite living 3,000 miles away, he was able to attend my wedding to Carol the year after Carol and I graduated from college that same year. In fact, he was even one of my best men and arrived the week before the wedding. It was great to get close to him again. He lived at my parents' house since the wedding was in the town we grew up in for the first 11 years of our lives, so I saw him often in the days before the wedding. I was sure that Carol was the love of my life. She was good-looking, funny, smart, and didn't have any difficult personality traits or issues that I was able to spot in the 3 years we dated, 2 in college and 1 after. She liked to have a good time, but she wasn't an unbridled or pushy flirt, and wanted to eventually have kids and live off the grid like I did. Ken and Carol seemed to get along just fine until our bachelor and bachelorette parties ended, every 2 days before the wedding. Then Ken seemed reserved around her. Since I had so much to do in the last 2 days before the wedding, I never asked him about it. Unfortunately, things didn't work out with Carol and me. In a situation too trivial to be considered real, after we had been married for 2 years, I got a stomachache one fall Sunday at a professional soccer game and left before halftime to return to our 2-bedroom apartment. I found her in our bed with Jeremy, one of her co-workers whom I had dated a couple times. Since I was already nauseous, the shock of seeing them drove me over the edge, and I could tell I was going to throw up. Once I realized this, I directed my vomit at the 2 of them as they were in the midst of having sex in the missionary position. The first volley of vomit hit Carol, who had her eyes closed, right in the face, and Jeremy on the arm. The second volley hit Jeremy in the side and back of his head. He hadn't had time to turn to face me yet when he heard Carol scream. The third round hit them both and ended their little sexual tryst. If I hadn't felt so bad, both from the stomach issues and from seeing the love of my life sleeping with another guy in my bed, I might have found it amusing, or done some other physical damage to one or both of them. Instead, I just collapsed on the floor, wanting to die right now. I think I even lost consciousness for a while, though I did hear noisy activity and a series of "oh shit" and some sort of crying or screaming. I couldn't distinguish them, given my condition at the time. After an indeterminate period of time, my ability to think fully returned to me, and I stood up. Neither Jeremy nor Carol was in sight. I took off my clothes, which I had also thrown up a bit on, right in our bedroom and left them on the floor next to the vomit-stained bed. I then went to our second bathroom and took a shower before climbing into bed in the guest bedroom, again wishing I was dead. I was physically and emotionally exhausted and fell asleep at about 3 in the afternoon and didn't wake up until 7 Monday morning. Even though my stomach had now calmed down enough that I could work, I seemed sick and took the day off because emotionally I was at my limit. Fortunately, Carol wasn't home Monday morning. I moped around for a few hours, gathering some of my clothes and accessories, packing them into a couple suitcases with the intention of finding another place to live. We only had 6 weeks left on our apartment lease, and obviously I wasn't going to renew it. I would let the landlord know as soon as I felt a little better. Around 10 in the morning, my cell phone rang. Caller ID said it was Tiffany, Carol's maid of honor at our wedding and someone I got along well with, though I thought she was immature for a 25-year-old girl. "Brian here," was my stellar greeting. Tiffany didn't beat around the bush. "Brian, Carol is here and she feels terrible." "Why is that, Tiff?" I replied. She didn't like being called Tiff, but at that point any friend of Carol's was my enemy. Well, you know, "Because of yesterday," she mumbled, stammering. "What about yesterday? You don't mean she slept with some jerk in my bed while I was at a soccer game, do you?" She seemed to be enjoying herself, So what was so terrible about it? Well, Tiff stammered. She certainly hadn't gotten a degree in public speaking from the Justice College. She wants to come over and talk to you about it, but she's afraid you'll get really mad. Maybe I could come too, she continued. Despite my depression and the remnants of my stomach problems, I thought quickly. Sure, Tiff. Why don't you and her come over Wednesday night, say around 7? I really don't want to see her before then, so I hope she can stay with you tonight and Tuesday night. Tiff seemed surprised by my willingness. Okay. Let me ask Carol. I heard some mumbling in the background, and then in a raspy voice, Tiff said, Great, Brian. I'll see you then. And again. Carol's sorry. I cut the call short. Now, I had to be sure to find a new place to live and move out by 7 o'clock Wednesday night. I took another shower, ate some white bread toast so it would stay in my stomach and not beg for it back, and went to the phone. By 10 p.m. that evening, I had rented a small storage room, and it held most of the things I wanted to keep from our marriage, including no wedding photos, or any photos of Carol at all. I also had permission to use one of the apartments my company rented to visiting clients between Wednesday and Sunday, which would give me plenty of time to find a new place to live. Of course, I never cleaned up anything at the scene of the affair, including my vomited clothes, but I left everything as it was after I threw up on Jeremy and Carol. I went to work on Tuesday, and although physically I had mostly recovered, emotionally I was at a complete loss. However, my hard-ass female boss, though really kind at heart, figuratively put her boot up my ass, so I was surprisingly productive. On Wednesday, I took half a day off to move the rest of my stuff and leave my wedding ring on the kitchen table in my old apartment, and to meet with a real estate agent who specialized in apartments. She promised to show me a few apartments on Saturday and guaranteed she could find me a suitable new place to live by the end of the day. I turned off my cell phone around 5 o'clock Wednesday night, went to the gym and worked out for 2 hours, pumping more iron per session than I ever had before, fantasizing that every lift was a kick in Jeremy's balls or Carol's face. After my workout, I stopped by the diner for a light dinner. When I got to my company apartment at 9:30, just for fun, I checked my cell phone. 4 missed calls from Tiffany. I laughed and deleted the messages without listening to them. I had an appointment with a divorce attorney on Monday. Long story short, I was divorced within 6 months, and I never had to see Carol again because the shark I hired was able to avoid court-ordered marriage counseling sessions by claiming I was in therapy, which, as far as my lawyer knew, was true. However, my therapy was not with a counselor. In fact, my therapy consisted of picking up harlots in bars almost every Saturday night and sleeping with them. Although I was still mostly devastated inside after my experience with Carol, the one-night stands were physically satisfying, but not worth a dime for my emotional healing. By the time I'd been divorced as long as I'd been married, my 28-year-old ass had a number of advantages. First, although I had always been in good physical shape, I had become a real gym fanatic. I had 6 dice and the ability to bench press almost twice my 85-pound weight. I watched my diet and felt better, physically, than I ever had in my life. Second, I didn't have much of a personal life except for one-night stands, and in a job that was well-suited to my talents, I progressed further and faster than anyone else in the history of the large company I worked for. In fact, almost 3 years after my divorce was final, I had a 6-figure bonus and was on top of the world. Third, because I wasn't tied to my job, I didn't mind business travel and was able to see many interesting places, and when my schedule allowed it, I would stay for a day or two after business was over to enjoy the city I was traveling to. On these business trips, I sometimes used the services of call girls who were usually better fun for one night. Since I was just living at home and had a great expense account and compensation, hiring call girls was not a financial problem. I clearly wasn't ready for a relationship. I kept in touch with Ken by phone and email over the years. He expressed condolences for my divorce, but in retrospect, his comments denigrating Carol were a bit harsher than they should have been since he didn't see Carol except for the week before and at the wedding. A year after my divorce, Ken married Audrey. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend, but it was absolutely necessary for me to be on a business trip to Amsterdam at the time. I sent him and his wife an expensive watch with "Happily Ever After" inscribed on it and an engagement photo imprinted on it, which he said they loved very much. I had never seen Audrey in person, but she looked like a fox in the photograph, although I thought her curly blonde hair and excessive makeup somewhat spoiled her appearance. Shortly after I received my six-figure bonus, I had a business trip to a town in the capital region where Ken and Audrey lived. However, following Murphy's Law, Ken himself was on a business trip for the first 3 days of my trip. However, he would be back in town on the last day of my business trip, and the day I would extend my trip. We agreed to meet at his house for dinner on Friday night that week, and for me to spend the day with him and Audrey on Saturday before flying home on Sunday. I arrived in Ken's metropolitan area early Monday afternoon before my first business meeting Tuesday morning. It had been a long time since I had entertained, and I expected the area to have top-notch call girls, since there were several million people living there. The doorman, Tim, at the fancy hotel I was staying at was particularly friendly, and we struck up a conversation. I love chatting with real locals in any place I visit. I arrived at the wrong time, and we actually chatted for about 10 minutes. At the end, he said, with a smile, "If you need any friendly companionship during your stay, at a business dinner or something, let me know." I was pretty sure I knew what that meant. I saw Tim the next morning and was candid with him. "Tim, I would love to have a loving companion. Do you have any suggestions?" I winked at him and slipped him a $50 bill. When he saw the face of Ulysses S. Grant looking back at him, a faint smile appeared on his face. He pulled out a card with the name Kitty on it and a phone number printed in flowery script and nothing else. "She is married, part-time, independent, and the only one I can really recommend. If she is unavailable, I can give you the numbers of local escort services." I thanked him and got into the cab he hailed for me. I didn't waste any time. With a 15-minute drive to my meeting place, I arranged to meet Kitty at my hotel for drinks at 8 p.m., and, if we were both agreeable, maybe have a nice time afterward. She was expensive, $1,000 a night, but since I had the opportunity to socialize with her for a couple drinks and a $100 appearance fee before making a decision, I was okay with it. Kitty was unlike any call girl I'd used before. Her shiny dark hair was slicked back, and with the exception of barely visible lipstick, she wasn't wearing any makeup. Also, her dress was completely discreet. I recognized her immediately by the white carnation above her lush left breast. Despite the conservative nature of her dress, it did not hide her magnificent figure. I walked up to her and introduced myself as John Smith, the assumed name I had given her on the phone, which she obviously knew was fake, and we sat down at a table in the hotel bar. Kitty was attractive, and within 5 minutes I realized she had that factor. While her beauty probably rated a 9 on a 10-point scale, her sexuality was off the charts. Within 20 minutes, I shoved $900 in cash under her desk. I gave her a $100 bill the first time I shook her hand. The hotel gym had lockers controlled by guest-determined codes, and she had put her purse and its contents in the locker, having first discreetly taken 3 condoms out of it. I grinned to myself. I wonder what she expected me to do. The most condom sex I'd ever had in a night was 2. Without a rubber, though, my record was 4. Before she put her cell phone in her locker, she told me she needed to make a private phone call. I assumed her husband, based on what Tim had told me, though we didn't talk about her marriage when we were drinking. I gave her my room key card and went upstairs to 924. Kitty arrived at 924 15 minutes after me. I was in boxers, with a drink from the minibar in my hand and another on the table for her. She smiled, took a sip of her drink, and then immediately shed her clothes and unraveled her hair. Naked, she was possibly the sexiest woman I had ever seen in my life. She imprinted a kiss on my lips. Some call girls don't kiss, but her kiss was passionate. Then she recommended a shower while she pulled off my boxers and giggled. "Good aspect ratio. I'm going to have fun." It was hard not to do it in the shower, but she deftly kept me under control, giving me unrestricted access to her stunning but firm breasts. A weighty addition to her recognizable virtues was the conversation in bed after she got off me. Her conversation in bed wasn't heavy. It was fun and interesting at the same time. I probably enjoyed it more than any other bedtime conversation in my entire life. After by far the 2 best condom hours of my life, she fell asleep in my arms. I came off one more time, remembering the condom again, in the middle of the night, the first time I had my 3rd condom sex. The one in the spoon position in the middle of the night was even better than the first 2. Hard to believe, but it was true. The next morning, we had a good laugh at breakfast. She was gorging on blueberry pancakes like she was a truck driver who'd been on the road for 12 straight hours. My teasing about it made her smile mischievously. "Great sex always makes me hungry," she grinned before filling her mouth with another bite. I liked Kitty so much that I did something unprecedented. I asked her to do it again that evening. "If you take me out to dinner and dancing, I'll only charge you $500, she giggled. I really enjoyed last night. "It's a deal," I replied quickly. "You can come over at 6:30 p.m. and make reservations at any restaurant you want." I received a passionate kiss goodbye. My Wednesday night dinner and dance date went as well as it could have. By 7 p.m., I no longer remembered that I was with a married call girl. It was almost like a romantic date. After 3 more impressive times in condoms that night, I could barely remember my name. Sure enough, at breakfast Thursday morning, I asked her if she could do Thursday night again. "Yes, but first we have to discuss the problem." "Okay," I said expectantly. "I'd love to sleep together tonight without a rubber, but we have to have a certain level of trust. I've never done it with John before, and I'm sure you're uncomfortable with it since I'm a call girl. I don't know if you'll believe me when I tell you I'm 100% clean, but I trust you, and I'll believe you if you say I am." My emotions were screaming yes while my brain was saying no. I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't pulled my tie to bring my head closer to hers and whispered in my ear, "I guarantee heaven." "Okay," I obediently replied. Sweat was already glistening on my forehead at the thought of it. "Let's have a quick dinner, watch a short movie, and then get down to business," she smiled. That's what we did. Only we didn't finish the whole movie, so after only 45 minutes, I can't tell you what the movie was about, we were catching a cab. Thursday night was one that I thought I could only dream of, not one that would actually become a reality. Kitty outdid herself. She took things to a new level. When I woke up the morning after, I was beyond ecstatic. At breakfast on Friday morning, however, I was in shock. This was the first woman since my divorce that I wanted a long-term relationship with, and she was not only married, but a call girl. Again, though, I didn't think about either of those 2 things as we tried to transform to the point of passing out last night. Kitty also seemed to be in a pensive state of mind. After about 10 minutes of silence over breakfast, she moaned, "I wish it could go on like this for a few months. Unfortunately, my husband will be home tonight and I'll have to turn into Susie's housewife." "Kitty, I could fall in love with you." It spontaneously came off my lips, straight from my heart, before I realized I was about to say it or could stop it. When I said it, an unhappy expression appeared on her face, and then she seemed to come to her senses and tearfully mumbled, "Please don't call me if you come back to town. My life is too complicated as it is." Then she abruptly got up and walked away, leaving 2 pancakes on her plate. Despite my anxiety and self-pity, I was a tiger at the final meetings on Friday, and by the time I left for Ken's house around 5 o'clock, I had accomplished everything I wanted to during the trip. When I reported to my supervisor, the same one who, figuratively speaking, had given me a kick in the ass when I'd caught Carol cheating. Every time she was promoted, I did it too. She was thrilled. "Spend your bonus night or 2 with the company," were her last encouraging words. By the time the cab dropped me off at their 3-bedroom Gothic-style country house, I had suppressed my self-pity over the fact that the woman I could have easily loved was out of reach, and was looking forward to meeting Ken and Audrey. Ken greeted me enthusiastically at the door with a manly hug and a pat on the back. "Wow, you look better than I've ever seen you," he blurted out. "I feel better than ever, too," I blurted back. "I'm sorry, but it looks like you could lose a few pounds," I grinned, jabbing my finger at his protruding, though not large, belly. "Audrey cooks too well and I can't get away from the table. Come over and meet her," he said. Fortunately, neither Audrey nor I had anything in our hands, which would have certainly fallen out when we saw each other in the hallway between the kitchen and the hallway. Ken had already relieved me of the 1 5-liter bottle of Magnum wine and the bouquet of flowers I had brought. Audrey was drumroll Kitty. Obviously noticing my sagging jaw, Ken asked, "What's wrong, Brian?" Thinking faster than I ever had in my life, I blurted out, "In the only picture of Audrey I'd ever seen, she had curly blonde hair and thick makeup, but now she had straight brown hair and light makeup. I would never have recognized her. Apparently, Audrey can think too." Because by the time I finished my comment, her expression had changed from shocked to smiling, and she purred, "Well, Ken likes my natural hair color better, and he says I don't need makeup to look adorable." "I have to agree with him," I replied casually, taking her hand and kissing it. Considering the circumstances, dinner went as well as it could have. I was on autopilot, and apparently Audrey was too. It helped that the wine in the bottle of Magnum I brought was Ken's favorite, and he drank almost the entire 1.5 liters. Neither Audrey nor I were interested in getting drunk, for fear of what might come out of our mouths. When Ken was in the bathroom, Audrey came up to me and said, "Please don't tell Ken." I hesitated, then replied, "I'm not sure I can promise that. If I were him, I would want to know." "Let me share some information with you before you make a decision. Give me 5 minutes tonight or tomorrow, and I think you'll have a different perspective," she replied. When I hesitated, she said, "Please, just do a favor for the person you called your best lover in the world in the middle of the night." I didn't remember saying that, but it was certainly true. There had been many times during my intercourse with Kitty Audrey when I had practically gone mad with bliss. "Okay, we'll make time to talk." Fortunately, Ken made it easy for us to find time to talk. An hour after dinner, he insisted that I spend the night at his place Friday and Saturday. Audrey convinced him that he was too tired to drive and that she would drive me to and from the hotel, taking the time to get to know me better. Ken was thrilled with this scenario. As Audrey drove me to the hotel, she didn't hesitate to declare herself right. "I'm only telling you this because I'm not in a position to get a divorce right now, and Ken feels very guilty about what he did to you. I'm betraying his trust by telling you." "What did you say?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. Audrey went into a long explanation of all the details of her story about Ken. It took almost the entire 25-minute drive back to the hotel. The gist of it was that the day after the bachelor and bachelorette party, which was also the day before the wedding, Ken had overheard 2 of Carol's bridesmaids talking when they didn't know he was around. They were apparently stunned that Carol had screwed a stripper without a rubber at the bachelorette party and then arranged to meet him when she returned from her wedding trip. When Audrey asked why Ken hadn't told me before the wedding, especially since he was well aware that fidelity was important to me, he just brushed her off and said, "It's not my problem, and I didn't want him to kill the messenger." Years later, he felt bad about it, but he swore he would never, ever tell me about it, even during or after my divorce. The details of the story Audrey told fit perfectly with the time, place, and events surrounding my marriage to Carol, and I had no doubt that it was pure truth. It certainly explained why Ken's reaction to Carol had changed shortly before the wedding, and why he had been so insistent on telling me "good riddance" when we talked on the phone while my divorce was pending. As I packed up all my clothes and papers at the hotel and checked out, I thought of nothing else but Brian, Ken, and Audrey's relationship and my past with Carol. If I had known what Ken had done at the time, I would have called off the wedding. It would have saved me from wasting 3 years of my life on that whore. One good thing was that my mind was clear when I slept with Audrey. By the time I got back to Audrey's car, I had decided never to tell Ken about Audrey's side business as Kitty. As soon as I plopped into the passenger seat, I informed Audrey of my decision. This elicited a smile from her and a fervent kiss. By then, I felt comfortable enough with Audrey to ask her about her side business. "Why do you work as a call girl?" I boldly asked her. "You can tell me to mind my own business and I'll never bring it up again, but my mind craves this information like a man in the desert craves water." "I'll tell you," she giggled, and then she did. Like the story of Ken's betrayal of me, this story was long, convoluted, detailed, and nuanced. The bottom line is that Ken effectively sabotaged her career, insisted she be a housewife even though they had no children and he had no intention of having any, contrary to what he told her before they married, and lost much of his libido, all within the first year of their marriage. She worked as a call girl to earn enough money to end the marriage with dignity. Although by the time we got back to their house, I didn't approve of it. At least I understood her point of view. By the time we got inside, Ken had already fallen into a wine-induced sleep. After Audrey left their bedroom with that information, she showed me to the guest bedroom. I blocked the door as she got ready to leave. "I really need something to help me sleep," I grinned. And Ken isn't himself. "Just sex, and I'm out of here," she giggled, starting to take off her clothes. She actually left my room to go take a shower. On Saturday, the three of us went sightseeing in the city, had lunch at a famous restaurant in the main city park, and generally enjoyed ourselves. Toward evening, Audrey and I went to her health club to work out. Ken had never exercised much, and I was impressed with her routine. After a shower, we headed out for dinner and then drinks. Ken got drunk again, so Audrey and I had some more naked fun in their guest bedroom before she went to bed with Ken. On Sunday, Ken wanted to watch soccer. I was no longer as big an NFL fan as I had been before I came home from the game and found Carol enjoying herself, so Audrey volunteered to drive me to the airport. On the way, we had a frank conversation. "I really like you, Brian," she began the conversation. "Not just the sex, which is by far my best ever, but you're an interesting and funny guy. What do you think?" After a long pause, I decided to be honest. "As I gaffed once before, I could fall in love with you. However, I'm going to try to forget you. I don't like the idea of dissolving your marriage to my cousin, despite how meanly he treated me by not informing me of Carol's true character. And while I certainly took advantage of that, I'm not sure I could have gotten past you without you being a call girl." "That's fair enough, and I understand. However, I have a lot to think about. I'm divorcing Ken anyway, and I've already lost my taste for being a call girl after my brief affair with you. So I'm quitting. How about we just stay in touch? I'll let you control the pace and nature of our future communication. Is that okay with you, Brian?" I didn't have to pause in response to that. "Sounds like a plan," I grinned. I would have liked to blow her off, but the memories of having fun with her outside of the bedroom prevented me from doing so. Over the next year, I visited Ken and Audrey's town 3 times, twice on business and once just to see Audrey. I never told Ken I would be in town on any of my visits and only spent time with Audrey. Audrey was so sultry, fun, smart, and interesting that I had a very hard time convincing myself that I wasn't in love with her. Sex with her spoiled me for other women. And for the entire next year, the only time I had sex with anyone but her was when I was depressed after a phone call with her and picked up a slut at a bar who looked something like her. It had been about 380 days, not that I was counting, since I first met Audrey when the receptionist in the main lobby of our building called around 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. "There's a female visitor to see you. She says her name is Kitty. Should I send her upstairs?" "What the hell?" went through my head. I must have been speechless for a long time because the receptionist asked, "Are you here, Mr. Davidson?" I replied, "Oh, I'm sorry, Monique. I'll be right down to escort her upstairs." Since we were in a public place, Audrey and I didn't kiss when I met her in the lobby, but we gave each other a quick hug. "What brings you to town, Audrey?" I asked as we rode the elevator up to my office. "I have some news I want to share with you and then have a serious talk about our relationship," she smiled. "I'll show you my office and introduce you to my boss. Then at 5:30 p.m. or so we can go out to dinner and then we can talk at my apartment. How does that sound? We can also deliver your luggage to my apartment." "Great, and I won't stop you from doing the work you need to do. But I hope you won't mind if I stay for the weekend," she replied. We waited until dinner was over and we took a walk around a nearby small lake before Audrey and I headed to my apartment, and she expressed what was on her mind. She wasn't shy about expressing herself. "Here's a copy of my divorce decree," she said, handing me a paper from the small valise she'd carried with her throughout the day. I looked through it quickly. It was what she was presenting and dated 3 days earlier. As soon as I pulled away from it, she held out several other papers. "This is a sonogram of our baby growing in my belly, a little girl, as well as a prenatal non-invasive DNA test done earlier this week that shows you are her father. I swallowed, looking through those documents. I was about to ask how she got my DNA, but then I realized how ridiculous it was to ask. Those papers, too, turned out to be just what she said they were. Again, as soon as I took my eyes off them, my mouth was suddenly dry. She handed me another document. This is a proposed prenuptial agreement that states that if we get married, and if I then ever have sex of any kind with anyone other than you, I leave the marriage with only my clothes, jewelry, any car I bring into the marriage, and $5,000. Nothing more. And that I will not contest custody of our child or children. That was over the top, but my mouth was so dry I didn't think I could answer verbally and be understood. So I just read the document. Again, it was exactly as she described. When I looked up again, she continued. There is no way I can prove with certainty that I stopped being a call girl. However, I have signed an affidavit to that effect that says if you ever prove otherwise that I have had sex with anyone other than you or Ken in the last year, I will pay you $25,000. I also have an affidavit from Tim, the doorman who put you in touch with me, that I told him I was no longer available and that he never gave my name to anyone else in the last year. She held out 2 more sheets. As my mouth went even more dry, I read the 2 affidavits. Again, they were exactly as she had presented them. Finally, I talked to your mother. I met her at my wedding to Ken and we seemed to hit it off. I have talked to her on the phone or exchanged emails over the years. I didn't tell her much about our relationship, but I did ask her what difficulties she and your father would have if I left Ken and you and I somehow got along. I don't have her affidavit, but you can confirm with her that she doesn't mind, even though it would probably prevent another full family reunion. A tortured smile appeared on her face after that last statement. I don't know what to say. Finally, stammering, I squeezed out. You need time to think. Let's go to bed and you can think about it and share your thoughts with me, however long it takes, maybe even by the end of the weekend. I must warn you, however, that pregnancy seems to have made me more horny than ever before. It's a frightening thought, isn't it? She said with a wide smile, this time not a fake one. For the rest of the weekend, nothing more was said on any of the issues she raised or the documents she showed me. There were 2 reasons for this. The first was that she wanted to give me space and time to think without any pressure or argument. The second was that my brain was so full of endorphins, bubbling like the Amazon during the rainy season, that there was little chance of me being able to really think. Since I obviously hadn't had a chance to think things through by Monday, I invited Audrey to stay at my apartment for as long as I could, since I was leaving for work, and to rest up after the last 3 nights, on Monday morning. It took me 2 weeks before I came to a firm decision on the issues Audrey had raised. During that time, Audrey never pressured me at all or even mentioned it. What finally made me decide was the joy of having someone to come home to and share my day with. Of course, there was also the incredibly great sex, but I had convinced myself that having a regular fun life partner was the most important thing. 2 weeks after Audrey's arrival, as we were walking around the same little lake we'd been walking around the first night she arrived, halfway through the walk, I got down on my knee and pulled out my ruby engagement ring. I knew she wanted something completely different than the diamond one she'd given back to Ken after the divorce, and asked her to marry me. She pretended to think it over before answering, but as soon as I started tickling her, she said yes. She signed the prenup she had prepared. I talked to my parents and even my aunt and uncle, Ken's parents, and then we were married in a small ceremony 3 weeks after I proposed. That was 5 years ago, and I added 2 more children, just 2 girls and a boy. Those were the 5 happiest years of my life. My reality that I fell in love with my cousin's wife while she was working part-time as a call girl, after I left my first wife for cheating on me and then eventually entered into a monogamous happy marriage with her, is stranger than fiction. However, I don't think much about it. I'm just enjoying life. We haven't spoken to Ken since we got married.